welcome everyone to the launch of the Cerebral Cricketer Podcast. So I'm your host T. Others may know me from the Sam Consis fan page. Others may know me from other initiatives. So welcome to the debut of episode 0. Essentially, this episode is more about introduction, get into the vibe and the feel of this podcast and why I started it. So many may know that, I've been a Sam Consis fan and started that page and it popped off. And so essentially an extension of that, I feel that another side sort of project or professional initiative that I wanted to take, or the route I wanted to take, was also to interview players and understand the mental side of the game, something that I've been passionate about for a while now. So I've been brainstorming a lot about what the podcast bio should be and the objectives of the podcast. So the tagline of the podcast, or the initiative, is of the Cerebral Cricketer Podcast, is decode the mind, master your temperament. That for me exemplifies the idea that I want to really pick the brains of all sorts of cricketers, from grade level to domestic cricketers to up and coming cricketers to international cricketers. And I think I wanted to, because a lot of the conversations online we see is about the temperament or technique of batsmen and bowlers and how they go about things, which is obviously important, but I want to really dig deep into the minds of the players, how they think, how they operate, what their process is, how they deal with nerves, how they go about their day-to-day, how ambitious they were, even just touch on their childhood, right? Like, I feel that a lot of people are influenced by their childhood, how parenting was like for them, and the situation or the relationship with their parents, that also determines an aspect of the success, depending if it's an international or domestic cricketer. All these aspects where maybe they were pushed to work hard from a young age, or they just had a natural drive. All these aspects about cricketers I'm really always been curious about, always wanted to learn what makes a really good cricketer. And even for myself, I play club cricket regularly, so I wasn't the best cricketer sort of growing up. I was okay, decent, but not necessarily that great. And it was only when I started getting really into the mindset, and shout out to Shane Watson's content, and the sort of, he has his own podcast where he talks with players like greats of the game, which is obviously something that's inspired me to do this as well. And those sort of conversations I've listened to, it could be Viv Richards that he was speaking to, or Mike Hussey, which I'm a big fan of Mike Hussey as well. Those sort of players really think about the game and have a certain approach, right? And it's amazing to really get an insight into how they think about things and what drives them to be the best. And I'm around, the world, there's always aspiring cricketers. There's people that are inspired to play at a high level. There's people that want to do the best they can, not even, it doesn't necessarily have to be at a high level, but just, within their team, within the local club cricket team. So I've always been inspired by that sort of content, and I really enjoyed listening to that content. So for me to start this initiative is more to get an idea of, sometimes it's not always, like, obviously it's beneficial listening to greats of the game and how they think about cricket and try to implement that. But I think I also want to make this podcast about, players from all different levels, right? From, as I said, first grade to domestic, because not everyone obviously gets to represent the country, right? So I would love to just interview players that only have played a handful of games for their country, right? Because that in of itself is, there's a lot of tests and a lot of challenges they've had to undergo in order to, get to, playing for or representing their country, right? Or even just domestic cricketers, or even fringe domestic cricketers, and how they go about it. Because I think there's so much benefit to learn from people that have been through all different experiences and, all different types of challenges, right? So rather than just kind of listening to the best of the best all the time, that doesn't necessarily give us the best picture of how to, assess the reality or the situation at hand when it comes to playing at a higher level, or how, getting to that level and different types of struggles people have went through. And so the name Cerebral is more to do, with the brain, and the inspiration for me is to understand more about the temperament and the way that players all think about. So I always wanted to do interviews or conduct interviews with such players where I can pick their brains about, what makes them tick, right? Like in all different facets. So my interest has always been around psychology and temperament theory. And I would love to sort of use that as a template to really pick the brains of the cricketers, because as you'll see, there's a lot of people that are very introverted cricketers, right? And I've been, doing this as a side project as well. I'm working through slides and workshops that I can do in order to get across the sort of temperament archetypes of different cricketers. So one of the stuff that I was preparing was, you have sanguineous or, extroverted cricketers like Rishabh Pant or even Sam Consis, right? And you have a bit more introverted cricketers like Kane Williamson as well, right? And maybe Steve Smith to an extent, right? So, or you have extroverted cricketers like Labuschagne, right? And all of these players are all different. They're human beings, and human beings are so multifaceted. So much makes up a human being, whether it be through nature or nurture. Nature being essentially what they're born with and the qualities and traits they naturally have from a young kid. So some people just naturally are, social, are naturally driven, right? Some other players may not have that kind of level of energy or intensity, but, through nurture, they've developed to find, their own sort of way, as opposed to someone that has it more naturally, right? When it comes to energy and intensity. So I think it's really important to really get into the psychological side, because now I've read Shane Watson's books on Winning the Inner Battle. It's a brilliant piece of work. And for me, like doing this initiative and project in interviewing players, I want to also incorporate my understanding of psychology into the picture when it comes to tailoring it to or providing insight from the players itself, obviously, but then compartmentalizing it and making it easier for others to hopefully digest it, and then essentially they can implement it. So someone of a certain temperament or a certain archetype or psychological archetype, if they're a bit more introverted, obviously someone, or a bit more structured in their approach to things, someone like, Kane Williamson would be beneficial for them, like in terms of understanding how they go through. So sometimes the most extrovert, like you can't really force, Rishabh Pant to go about doing things in a way that Kane Williamson does, right? Like they're totally different people. So I always want to start a project where we can help people to understand the processes of certain cricketers that are a bit more closer to them when it comes to their archetype of personality and the way they think, right? Like so I think that's really important for aspiring cricketers, and that's something that I've really been keen on. So that's like a sort of workshop that I do want to run, but then that's obviously tied with the podcast, because with the podcast I have the opportunity, thankfully, hopefully, to be able to interview all these players and really pick their brains about how they grew up and how they played their game, and how did they deal with nerves at a young age, and was there certain things that they had to work on from a young age that allowed them to mitigate those mental blocks or those challenges, mentally speaking, right? And how much of it is talent and ability versus the mental, right? So because I feel that through listening through a lot of content from players and interviewing them, hopefully that you'll be able to pick up more things and implement them from mental capacity, because obviously to be able to get better from a technical or from a skills-based perspective, you need to go to the nets and train hard and all that sort of stuff, or as a bowler you need to do the hard yards. But mentally there's many things that you can just listen to or, flick on. This is the beauty of the podcast, right? You're just like driving somewhere, doing household chores, and then you can just kind of flick on an interview and be inspired by a certain cricketer and the way they do things or the way they approach the game. And then you can quickly just implement it, right? You don't have to necessarily, go to the nets, and that requires a lot more effort in that sense. So that's also another motivation from my end. So I actually, thankfully, I've been working, hard behind the scenes to get this up and running, because obviously it's not easy, just starting it up and trying to get, high level cricketers to come on the podcast and talk to you, right? Because they don't have, I don't have a quote unquote social media presence with this particular Instagram page just yet to be able to convince them to come on. But it's all about, it's always a struggle at the beginning, right? And you just have to try to sell the idea to the people and make them believe in the project. And so thankfully, through close friends and family and myself, trying to contact others, I've already managed to get one international player to come on the show. And then there's another ex-domestic player that's going to come on, and another domestic player, I think he should be joining in pending when the Sheffield Shield season finishes. So there's domestic cricketers also. So I already have a few guests lined up. So I'm really excited because I want to, as I said, each player has their own journey, right? So for example, with the Shane Watson podcast that he has, he's already interviewing all these legends of the game. I guess my difference from that, it's not necessarily just the same template. It will be slightly different because I want to interview up and coming youngsters and how they think about the game, right? Because obviously they're a bit more fearless and they're not sticking to the traditional structures of how to play cricket, right? They are playing in a different way with the advent of T20 cricket and that sort of T10 even that's come up nowadays. And so their style of cricket is obviously a lot more expressive and fearless. And obviously the advent of baseball as well adds to that way of how youngsters approach the game, right? As opposed to, I guess, maybe a decade or two ago where there's a lot more structure or patience or conservatism to the way that player plays their game or plays cricket, right? And obviously how IPL shaped and changed cricket, that's a huge factor as well. So a lot of youngsters now are playing cricket a lot differently. So I'd love to pick their brains about how they go about it, and especially if a youngster like that who's a bit more aggressive in their stroke play, they approach Test cricket, for example, and what their mindset is and what makes them tick, what things have they implemented from a young age, and what things are they doing from a very process level perspective, right? When it comes to batting approach, that's something that for myself, I've seen a lot of interviews for example, Sehwag, Virender Sehwag, he talks about how he sings songs. I think even some Australian players would do. I think Michael Clark, I remember listening to a podcast I was doing. He was talking about how before he gets on to bat, he's already listened to music to drown out that noise that maybe his internal thoughts have some negative thoughts that play out that might affect his batting. So then as a result, he listens to music to drown out those thoughts, right? So each player has their own specific things that they do. And it would be amazing to really get into the nitty gritty of what players do and exactly how they combat it, right? How young players, maybe there's a situation where a bowler's on top of them. How do they go about that? Or even as a bowler's perspective, right? It's not obviously just about batsmen, but, bowlers, when batsmen are getting on top of them, what's their go-to strategy? Do they have fallback options? Do they know what their strengths are and what to approach as a result of the situation at hand? And, where, in terms of, team environment, how that is important to them when it comes to getting results, right? I've listened to a lot of Shane Watson's interviews, and he talks about, how Chennai Super Kings, for example, was very supportive and trusted the players, right? Because if you have, from the beginning of the season, the management trusts you in a certain position, and they'll guarantee that, for example, you'll play, 6 games. That shows that trust and makes it easier to perform, right? Because you're not under pressure to perform. So obviously a lot of up and coming cricketers would be in many situations where they have to they have a pressure to do well, and so I would love to pick their brains about how they go about it and what makes them achieve their best, right? And what things they do even before the game that helps them to do to be the best they can be, right? And even obviously game situations, right? When there's only 10 balls remaining and 12 runs to win for the batsman, how they approach it straight away, or do they back their abilities, or are they always aggressive, right? Or do they kind of ebb and flow between match situation? Like, I assume different players do different things, right? So I think all these conversations are like, it's never ending, right? Because human beings are multifaceted, right? Human beings have different ways of operating. It's not just one size fits all approach, right? Like the way that people talk about the youngsters in the game coming in, having that fearless mindset, right? Like obviously for them, they do things in a different way as opposed to someone that's a bit more structured, right? So it'd be really interesting to get those insights and perspectives, and not only just cricket specifically, but outside of cricket, and how much noise the cricketers have to block, and the advent of social media, obviously, with the way that players have to deal with hateful comments. And I think those conversations, people don't realize how much it can affect a person, right? So even with the fan page I run, like I get hate all the time, so it's really interesting kind of thinking from a cricketer's perspective. I'm like, man, they're probably copying like 1,000 times worse than this, and this one already kind of it makes me feel a certain way, so I can only imagine how it would make a cricketer feel, right? So I think all these conversations are really important, and especially it's not obviously just going to be about interviewing cricketers, like coaches, psychologists, experts in the game, or data analysis, those kind of people I'd love to interview, because I want to know what goes in behind a player achieving their best, right? Like what sort of things have to be considered within a team environment, right? Like obviously coach, they talk about having all the data and analytics, but it's also about how they foster a good culture, how they identify roles, and how to get the best out of certain people, and how they communicate and communication style. So I think all of these are really important, and I'm really passionate about this because whenever I see a youngster, whatever, a family friend or whoever, and they're young, and I've seen some of the coaching, unfortunately, when I go to their games, whatever, and it's a bit like, not gonna lie, it's a bit outdated, especially because some of them are a bit harsh and strict. I'm not saying everyone, right? But I'm saying some that I've encountered. And obviously coaches have to struggle a lot, and it's not easy running a cricket club and a team. It requires a lot of sacrifice, and they might not even do for any money, right? So I applaud them and stuff, but I'm more specifically talking about the style of how they go about it. Just like I would maybe question the style of teaching in today's schools, right? Like sometimes teachers might take a stricter approach, and that's not the best way to get the most out of their students. So similarly, in cricket, I've seen coaches not getting the best out of certain players or youngsters, because they're always overly critical, and it's not I understand from a psychological perspective that it's not helpful. It's not helpful always being critical towards someone, because especially if someone is from a has a love language of like words of affirmation, right? When they have words of affirmation, they need words of affirmation. Any criticism, they'll take it to heart, and it might affect them a lot, and it doesn't actually get the best out of them, right? So I think and especially I've seen like, I go to the net sometimes and I see like a youngster, just every ball, like the coach is like kind of telling them off. I'm sure they're not doing it intentionally, but it's like every single ball they're hitting, it's like, no, it's not good enough, and you have to play with this and this and that. Sometimes you're overly technical, but it's not really helpful, because it's all about the mindset, right? I've always felt like if your mindset is clear and at its best, it can be enough to do well in all levels, as opposed to just fixating on technique. Obviously, technique's important and crucial, but when you're playing with a certain freedom, when you're playing with a certain aggression, freeing the mind, I think that always gets the best out of a player, as opposed to feeling like they're constricted and having to play front foot forward, elbow, top hand, elbow, up wide and trying to hit the middle of the bat. And, once you think about too many things like that, it sometimes takes away from the player, like in the performances. And rather, they can achieve results or better results by just having a clear mind, having a good process, how to, drown out the negative thoughts and, keep a clear mind and try to achieve the best. So I think all of those aspects are really interesting. And yeah, as I said, like I love psychology and stuff. And obviously I love cricket so much. Always following on listening to different stuff. I listen to like a bunch of podcasts, like, shout out to, the Great Cricketer Podcast. I listen to Jared Kimber podcast quite regularly as well. The Sky News team, I love, Nasser Hussain and Mike Atherton. Those are people I listen to. I sometimes listen to Michael Clark's one that he has, and the Willow Talk podcast is great. So I always try to keep up. I don't listen to every single one of them, but I try to listen to them when I'm, driving to work and, doing stuff around the house or outside of the house, all that sort of stuff while I'm at the gym. So I try to, get a feel for what they're discussing. And that's why I think I'm even more motivated to do a project like this, because I want to speak from a different lens, right? So as I said, like I'm really passionate about psychology, so I want to speak from that lens. I'm obviously just a club cricketer, so I think the way that I might ask questions might be a bit more digestible, rather than, if you're talking, a high level cricketer to a high level cricketer, sometimes things can get missed because they've experienced something that's normal to them, right? And playing cricket for your country isn't normal to us, right? So sometimes I might be asking questions in a way that is more for a commoner folk, if that makes sense. So on top of that, I want to just interview all sorts of players, right? So sometimes these podcasts, shout out to them, obviously doing amazing works and stuff like that. But I guess what I'm slightly different is that I'm going to try to interview like all sorts of different cricketers, right? Obviously batsmen and bowlers, but also players from other countries, associate nations, first graders in Sydney, or try to, or in Melbourne, all these kind of players that sort of had a taste for it, or tried and struggled even, and what their experiences have been like and what they're taking from the game, and coaches. So I just want to do a wide array. So obviously, hopefully, international cricketers, more of them, but also all sorts of cricketers. And I think that's a kind of unique standpoint. And yeah, just kind of couple that with just really drill them with how I, understand psychology and kind of unpack it further. Because sometimes, obviously, when a cricketer is interviewing another cricketer, it's just about cricket naturally. But I also wanted to kind of ask them from a psychological kind of standpoint and really hone in on that, on the details, because that's sort of my background, and I've done a lot of study around that. So I'm really passionate about that. And I wanted to read out, I read out the tagline, but I also want to read out the podcast bio. So the Cerebral Cricketer Podcast is a deep dive into the psychological side of cricket. Through exclusive interviews with cricketers, coaches and experts, we explore the mindset, thought processes and mental resilience behind success at the highest level, and also in all other levels of cricket. From how batsmen sharpen their focus to the mental cues bowlers use for consistent execution, this podcast unpacks the cerebral side of the game, one conversation at a time. So hopefully that kind of succinctly sums up essentially what I've been discussing and kind of waffling on about. But I'm personally really excited about this. As I said, I've been kind of thinking about doing this for some time actually, and thankfully because of the Sam Constance fan page that sort of popped off, I'm like, this is more of a reason for me to kind of do this as a professional venture on the side as well. Obviously, I'll still be doing the Sam Constance one and page, and I really enjoy it. Like, amazing community. I'm so blessed that I've been connected with so many people that share the love of the game the way that I do, and share their love for Sam Constance in the way that everyone is excited in the way that he debuted for the MCG. And I was so, like, it was crazy. I was actually there, and it happened so fast, right? In the last year, like, I need to get a bit of context. Like, I started that page because my close family, he has his own fan page of himself, of another player, and he's because I was talking about Sam Constance and up and coming cricketer. I've been following since before the Under-19 World Cup, so I've kept a close eye with him. So I was talking about him to a family member of mine, and he basically told me like, look, why don't you just start a page and see how it goes? And we're actually at the he told me this, he gave me the suggestion when we were at when Victoria was playing New South Wales in MCG. So I was actually there, and Steve Smith and all of them were playing. So I was there at the game, and I'm just like, okay, that's a good idea. I mean, I'll just give it a crack and see how it goes. And, the timing was insane. Like, like I started that page, and it was a few months later. Like at that time, people weren't sure if, I can't remember. I think McSweeney had an opportunity, was already called up to debut. Actually, no, sorry. They had those few practice games after that. I think for the Australia A team, they were playing like India, and then they eventually picked McSweeney. So at that time, it was like, I might have to wait, I don't know, 1 or 2 years to watch Sam Consist's debut, right, for Australia. And then it was insane, the timing. And, unfortunately, McSweeney, can you imagine what he went through, right? Imagine, like, if I could interview, that would be really interesting, sort of the emotions of that, right? Like, he got called up and then he got dropped. But then, Sam Consist made way into the team in a very short time, because he made that BBL 50, made that 100 in the Prime Minister's game. So that was actually insane, right? I mean, short amount of time, like, and then he had that insane debut, and I was like, managed to just get tickets last minute, thankfully, because that was the most craziest debut I've ever seen. That was probably the most craziest debut ever. And also on a Boxing Day MCG, it's like, against India, like, and against Bumrah, out of all bowlers in the world, is probably like one of the best in the world, and up there in all-time great pace bowlers in history, right? And the way that Sam Consist, like, the Australian team were struggling to deal with Bumrah, right? Like, they were a bit of sitting ducks, right? And then the way Sam Consist played was just ridiculous, right? It was just insane. It just revolutionized the game, honestly. And I was so thankful I was there and watched it all in the flesh, and I was full screaming out his name. Like, that's another story, right? Like, I was so pumped, so excited, right? Especially like before the toss, I was hoping Australia bat first so that I can watch Sam Consist on day one. And then so he's batting, and I'm literally screaming my head off, right? And there's a lot of people around me at that time, obviously, like, who's this crazy kid, crazy guy going his shouting his head off. And I was sitting next to a nice bloke, and he was, I was at one point where Sam actually looked in my direction, and I'm pretty sure he heard me. I don't know, like, to this day, I'm pretty confident he heard me. And the guy, like, people around me were saying, like, yeah, like, they were pretty convinced he heard me, because there's that famous visual, like, he was batting, and then he sort of motions to the crowd to G up. It's a very, like, it kind of went viral, right? Like that photo, that snippet of him sort of, I think he hit a 4 or something, and then he was kind of G'ing up the crowd, and the direction he was looking at was right at my direction, because I was, like, clearly, like, the loudest one as well. So yeah, so that was a very little memorable moment for me. So I enjoyed that, and just the way he played that game and that series, it just captured the hearts and minds of Australians, right? So, I would love to, one day, because I know that Sam Consist was, like, Shane Watson was mentoring from a young age, right? I think 14, 15 years old. And when you're reading Shane Watson's stuff, you can tell that he's put a lot of thought into how to approach the mental side of the game. Because, like, Shane Watson talks about, from when he was playing for Australia, and people criticized him a lot because he wasn't making big scores in Test cricket. But he obviously had a lot of, crazy amount of talent and potential. You could see it, the way he plays his shots and the way that he went about his business. So he talks about in his books, like, how he gassed himself too early. His, like, mind was always on. So he learned to sort of know when to think and not think, and, keep his mind fresh as much as possible for when the bowler is bowling the delivery, so he can focus on the ball and where it's going to pitch, and judging the length, right? And trying to use that for his muscle memory. So when someone like that has played international cricket and is mentoring someone like Sam Consist at a young age, he obviously can impart a lot of valuable advice, and clearly Sam has utilized that, right? and that's why he's very successful at such a young age, 19 years of age, right? So it would be amazing to just interview him and sort of talk about things from that end rather than just fixate on, shots and the ram shots, obviously, which you can get. Like, we have t-shirts at the Sexy Sammy Club, so shout out to that as well. But, just sort of the mental endurance or the mental thought process or the process that he goes through. I know that I've read even articles where he's talking about, like, he was practicing breathing techniques, and that's clearly something I'm sure maybe it's himself or maybe Shane Watson had a role in that, to just kind of pick his brains a little bit regarding how he approaches that mental side of things at such a young age, and obviously ask him about how he felt navigating, playing international cricket from, playing, first grade or domestic that had barely any, sort of crowd there at the games, and suddenly to, full house Boxing Day, right? So obviously there's a lot of challenges and, media and all these aspects that I'd love to, to be the dream to sort of ask him all these questions, right? So I think that's really important. I just want to do my part and have these conversations and get an understanding, and hopefully the viewers find a sort of interview or a cricketer that they relate to, and they feel that is the way that they think about life, or the way that they go about their business, or temperamentally how they think about things suits them. And so it would just be a straight copy paste, right? Like, since that ex-player would have shared some insights about how they prepare things or how they go about things, then it just makes it easier for someone to just implement that and try it out and see if it works for them and get the best out of their own cricket, right? So I just wanted to hopefully my aim is to provide that valuable insights for people and all sorts of cricketers, right? That's personally what I love listening to when it comes to cricket content. So I think that's all for now. So this is just episode 0, just to give a vibe and context of the podcast and the initiative. So you can definitely follow us on Instagram, on social media. We'll be up on Spotify, Apple, iTunes. I don't know about SoundCloud, but other podcast apps as well. So watch out for us, and I think we're on TikTok as well, so we'll get that up and running as well, and possibly on a Facebook page as well. But we're currently on Instagram, so share the love and support. Just share it to your friends and family. So hopefully this episode should be released soon, and then from there, I'm hoping in the next week or two, also very shortly, I'll release the interviews that I've done with. So there's the international cricketer and then the domestic ones, and I'd love to hear your feedback and get your thoughts and opinions. So I'm really excited about that, because one of them I was like full doing the episode outline, and I don't want to mention his name, just like reveal his name just now, but he has a brother that plays international cricket as well, so it's really interesting, right? Like, there's this phenomenon about international cricketers. Like, you have Sean Marsh, Mitchell Marsh. You've got many other people that have brothers that have played either high, like Sam Curran, Tom Curran, and there's the other Curran that plays for Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of players, right? Like, you have brothers that play cricket and make it to the top level. So it's really interesting to see that paying out. So I'd love to pick his brains about that as well. So the guy I'm going to interview has a brother that also plays international cricket. So that should be interesting, and to get the insight of that kind of idea of nature and nurture, right? Like, I feel like that side, if you have someone that has you have siblings that play cricket, you can always, it's like you have a leg up, right? Because you want to push each other to be the best, or very competitive spirit gets into the fold, and pushing each other to be the best, and you always have someone to play with, right? So sometimes if you're just you're a cricketer but you're only like, I don't know, a single child, it's hard to convince someone to throw a side arm to you, or go to the nets with someone. It can be a little difficult. So one of those things are advantageous for people that have siblings and play cricket, or similar age as well, and play cricket. So all these sort of questions, you know what I mean? I think it's really interesting to delve into, and hopefully it brings insight for others. So there's so much, as I said, psychology and the mind. It's very deep. There's so many things, you can talk about trauma, family trauma, that even I would say I've noticed some players that I look at them, I'm like, I feel like they have this whole notion of that, from a childhood, like the parents made them feel like they were not good enough. And so they've worked so hard in cricket to prove to others that they're good enough. And so that's probably why it drove them to be the player that they are, right? So I think it's deeper layers. It's really interesting because I've noticed some players that when they've done interviews, they sort of speak in that manner, which is really interesting, right? Like, it's about when it comes to understanding people, it's always about understanding how to heal, and those conversations are really prevalent on social media, right? Knowing your vices, knowing your thought patterns, knowing your love language, all this sort of stuff is really important, so that you can get a full whole self version of yourself that's your best version, rather than feeling like you're swayed by your vices, and that may inhibit the best version of yourself. But in some cases, people can argue like, oh look, if you're being felt to feel like you're not good enough your whole life, maybe that drives some people, which it could, but I mean that means that they also need healing to some extent, because a certain person, let's just say someone that's a bit more introverted or sensitive in their emotions, gets told or feels like they're not good enough, they're going to struggle, right? Like I've seen that a lot in cricket dynamics as well. Like a lot of people that you can see, like they just need a good word or two, right? They need positivity, and some environments can be a bit toxic in that sense, and it doesn't get the best out of them. I know for me, for sure, like certain environments I've been a part of get the best out of my cricket versus others. So like I think these conversations are really interesting, and as I said, it circles back to why I started the podcast, because I really want to ask the questions to all sorts of cricketers and see what makes them get the best out of themselves, and even the way that they play or how they play. If they played like that all that throughout their junior years, or was it something that clicked later on, or what I mean? There's so many plays I've seen like as well, right? Like I don't know if this is the best example, but when I watched Travis Head early in his domestic or international career, I didn't feel he was as aggressive as he was now. You know what I mean? So that's just a personal standpoint. I might be wrong on that, but that's just how I felt. And now he's obviously very aggressive, backs himself 100%. I didn't feel like he was like that exactly. And there was a time we got dropped from the Australian cricket test team, and he was criticized for fishing out for balls outside off. And it was interesting. Like, I don't know if people would point out that from a technical standpoint, right? Like, he's nicking off outside off, and therefore he needs to go to domestic cricket. And I remember Shane Warne, I think the late Shane Warne, mentioned that to an extent. I can't remember the exact quote that he said, but people were making that point. But then when he came back, I don't know if it's because he worked on his, maybe I'm sure he would have, but I think a lot of it as well is like the intent that he brought to his game on a different level. Like he just probably backs himself 100%. Possibly could be a change of the environment. I know a lot of stuff happening in the Australian cricket team. I don't know what, but maybe the environment, because everyone talks about how chill the culture is under Pat Cummins. I don't know if that's got to do with it. That kind of helped him play that game. So there's a lot of things to sort of unpack there, right, from that situation, because I feel that he came in a lot more aggressive when he made his comeback to the national team. And that's obviously done dividends, right? So I think, if I ever get the opportunity to ask Travis Head or talk to him, I think those questions are very pertinent. And maybe he's already mentioned stuff around that, but I'd love to pick his brains a bit more about that, right? And there's so many dynamics to cricketers, right? Like some people, you see Steve Smith, how methodical he is, right? Or you see Labuschagne, how I'm sure he's methodical in his own way as well, but he's a bit more like, obviously a lot more energetic, right? And they will have different things to how they approach their cricket, right? And a methodical approach that Steve Smith brings to his cricket would not work maybe for someone like a Rishabh Pant, right? So I think to get into really dissecting the processes of different places is really important, and something that I'm keen to do. So anyways, I'll probably wrap it up there. So I know that like all our episodes, obviously, will like this one was episode 0, so that's why I don't have a camera on my face. It's kind of an intro to make people, get a gist of what's to come with the podcast. But all our episodes going forward, especially with the interviews, it'll be with video, probably over Zoom. I'll try to do it in person as well, with cameras and stuff like that, and it'll be up on YouTube. So I know a lot of people love watching video and on video form, so definitely that will be there. So yeah, just please support the podcast. We're just getting started, and I'm hoping this is gonna go really far and wide, and I'm really excited and passionate about this project. It's dear to my heart, honestly. And as I said, like, it's not just about the podcast. I'm doing some stuff on the side that I'm trying to get together in terms of content when it comes to archetypes of psychological archetypes, and trying to bring that into different cricketers and getting an idea of or helping people through what works best for them, or hopefully it will help them get some insights. So I'm working on that on the side, which I'll share details about in due time. But thank you so much, guys. Share the podcast, love and all. And I don't know why I said love and all. But yeah, stay tuned for the next episode, because I'm really excited. It's going to be International Cricketer. But till then, take care. Peace out.